Hello, everyone. Happy Halloween. We are coming to you from the eLearning Center. My name is Ana Gonzalez, and I will be your host today, reading the spooky stories that were submitted by our very own students and our very own faculty. So because we got so many stories submitted to us, we were only able to select a few. If you submitted your story and we weren't able to read it, we are so sorry, but we did read them all. We had a whole meeting where we read all these stories. So thank you very much for submitting your stories. I think this went pretty well, so hopefully we'll do it again next year. So please submit your story again next year so we can read it. We might have to extend the time for next year's Spooky Confessionals. We are in our Spooky Confessionals session already. I'm going to go ahead and get started so we don't waste any more time. And our very first story was submitted to us by Jack, and it is called Snowball. It was gloomy and freezing cold that spooky Minnesota morning many years ago. I was about 9 years old and laboring at my first job. 9 years old. I hated having to be up hours before sunrise so I could deliver daily newspapers around our neighborhood. Other people waited warmly in their homes for my anticipated arrival while they got ready to leave for their busy days. I had to hurry to get home so I could prepare for school. My older brother had been doing this work for more than a year, and he was helping me learn his route so he could seek other employment. My last obligation for this ill-timed Arctic adventure was to drop the papers at the doors of the two houses I dreaded having to venture toward in the darkness of night or pre-dawn day. We called those immense, haunted-looking structures the dam houses because they were moved years ago to higher ground when the dam on the Mississippi River was built. To reach these residencies, I was forced to leave the secure neighborhood streets to walk through a scary forest of trees that had shed their leaves until warmer weather returned. Low-lying clouds surrounded me, and breathing the moist air left a taste of dirt in my mouth. There was barely enough light from a partially full moon peeking through the clouds for me to know where to place my feet while crunching through a crisp layer of freshly fallen snow. The wind, whispering eerie inferences as it wafted through the trees, only added to my distress. This was desolate, dim, and forbidding course to tread for a 9-year-old who was already afraid of the murky night. I was a boy who knew with complete certainty that the sinister forest was a place filled with vampires, ghouls, goblins, and other foul creatures who only came out when the light of day vanished. Saying several small prayers to protect myself, I silently completed my mission to the hilltop mansions and quickly escaped without encounter. My only injury was to the tips of my fingers and toes, painfully succumbing to the bitter sub-zero winter temperature. It was time to get home, so I slowly worked my way back to the safety of lighted local streets. As I continued, I cursed the incessant cawing of the crows for competing with the deafening beats of my heart. Neither paying tribute to my terror, I vigilantly scrutinized each of the tall black trees I passed and studied their naked arm-like branches, seemingly reaching out to snatch me up. Those towering timber trolls, or maybe even a lost zombie, whose rotting flesh I imagined I could smell, kept me abundantly alert. They could attack me at any moment. Suddenly, I felt something grab the inside of my left elbow and violently jerk my arm backward. I was positive some evil entity had seized me, and no one would likely ever see me again. I screamed so loudly that half the neighborhood might have awakened and ready to come to my rescue, but no one came. As my outburst quieted, I stood motionless for a moment, waiting for sharp fangs to bite into my neck or claws to rip me to shreds. Then I heard my big brother laughing loudly and uncontrollably. How could I have known that he had bravely gone ahead up to the frightful homes to bring them their day-to-day needed news and save me from the trauma? When he heard me carefully and cautiously approaching down the dark path, he hid behind a toppled tree trunk. And at just the right moment, he hurled a snowball at me. How incredibly fortunate for him that his frosty white projectile reached me precisely at my inner elbow. If it had hit any other part of my body, I might have frozen in fear for a fraction of time. but I would have had far less opportunity to entertain a conceivable childhood heart attack. Of course, my brother couldn't wait to tell everyone in my family about the incident. When they finally stopped laughing and regained their composure, my father immediately blessed me with my new nickname, Snowball. That mortifying moniker followed me well into my teenage years. Hopefully, I am the only one in the family who still remembers that traumatic time. This story is based on an actual event from 1963, and Jack was that child. Thank you, Jack, for submitting your story, or should I say Snowball? Thanks, Snowball. Since it is Halloween, if you want to put on the chat what plans you have, are you going to go trick-or-treating? Are you going to watch a scary movie? Are you dressing up? What are you dressing up as? Please feel free to put it in the chat. I'm going to pull up the next story. This reader or this person decided to remain anonymous, so I will respect their wishes and continue with their story. I remember my time at the University of Monterrey vividly. Not for the classes, the people, or even the lively city. It was the boarding house, La Casa de Asistencia, that still haunts my thoughts, even now, years later. I had signed up late, which meant I didn't get to stay in the same room as the other girls. Instead, I was placed in a small, cramped room on the other side of the house. It felt isolated and distant, and something about it always seemed off. The lady who owned the house had 2 sons, but we rarely saw them. They kept to themselves, occasionally appearing but never engaging. At first, it was just a minor detail, something that I didn't give much thought to, until the nights came. I don't remember when it started exactly, but it always happened in the dead of the night, when everything was so still you could almost hear your own heartbeat. I would be lying in bed, trying to fall asleep, when I'd suddenly feel it. The unmistakable sensation of someone entering the room. My heart would begin to race, but I was too terrified to open my eyes. The air around me would grow thick, and I would lie there, motionless, pretending to sleep, clinging to the hope that whatever or whoever was in the room with me would leave. But then the weight came. At first, it was subtle, like a gentle pressure on my chest, but it would grow heavier, pressing down on me until it became suffocating. I couldn't breathe, couldn't scream. My muscles tensed, frozen in fear, as I silently begged for the presence to go away. My only defense was to keep my eyes shut, hoping that if it couldn't see it, it couldn't hurt me. This would go on for what felt like an eternity, though in reality, it was just a few minutes. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the weight would lift, the air would clear, and I would be alone again. At first, I thought it was just my mind, playing tricks on me, the stress of school and living in a strange place, manifesting in terrifying ways. I didn't want to say anything to the other girls, who would believe me. But then, one day, the fear became too much to bear, and I confided in them. To my horror, their faces paled as I spoke, and when I finished, they admitted they had experienced the same thing. The same crushing weight, the same terrifying presence creeping into their rooms at night. That's when the suspicions began. We whispered about the sons, wondering if they were the ones sneaking into our rooms, but we had no proof. Just a creeping sense of dread that clung to us during the nights. It seemed too deliberate, too real to be a figment of our imaginations. We finally decided to bring it up to the lady of the house. But when we confronted her, she waved off our concerns, claiming her sons would never do such a thing. Still, the fear lingered, and though I didn't know if I could trust her, I had no choice but to stay, at least for a little while longer. Night after night, the same thing happened. The silent presence would enter, the suffocating weight would pin me down, and I would lie there helpless. But the worst part wasn't not knowing if it was one of the sons. It was a growing fear that perhaps it wasn't them at all. Maybe it was something else, something unseen, something that had always been there, watching from the shadows. I couldn't take it anymore. I packed my things and left the house, never looking back. Even now, I don't know what truly happened in that room. Was it just the boys playing some twisted game, or was it something far more sinister, something otherworldly? All I know is that every time I think about that house, I can still feel the weight pressing down on me as if it never truly left. Thank you so much for Anonymous. Okay, I'm going to read another story from another anonymous person. I remember when my parents and I moved into a house that, if you could see from the outside, was very, very old. The owner told us that the house was from the time of World War II. It belonged to her father, and she rebuilt it so she could use it and have some extra income. The house was old, it had a fake fireplace, and for me, it had a very sad vibe, but I didn't know why. My parents wanted to go to HB, and my mother told me that I could go, but with one condition, that I had to wear a sweater because it was cold. I quickly went to my sister's room to get one. Before turning on the lights, I noticed a silhouette standing in the darkness of the room. It was a little girl, no older than 6 years old, and for a moment, I thought it was my younger sister. Fatima, what are you doing there? Aren't you afraid of the dark? I said to the shadow, and all I saw was her shaking her head, saying no. My mother was already calling me, and as soon as I could, I entered the room, grabbed the first sweater I saw, and turned off the lights to then run as fast as I could out of the house. I tried to tell my parents, but they just didn't believe me. They said I was just imagining things. I was 11 when it happened. I remember that my paranormal experience with that house made me shiver, and I couldn't sleep for a few nights. Thank you, Anonymous. That's how a lot of scary stories, right? Scary movies start when a child sees something, but the parents don't believe them. You should always believe your children. Okay, for the next two stories, I'm going to bring in a special guest. I'm bringing in the director of the Writing Center, Miss Partida. So she's going to come in and share a couple of stories with us.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Happy Halloween. This is Maria Partida, director of the Writing Center. And we're going to start with the first story. It's also an anonymous writer, and this is how it starts. Long ago, when I was a little girl, my family and I were headed to San Antonio for Halloween at Six Flags. We headed out early in the morning to find a parking spot. After a fun day, we were exhausted. It was already night, and we were heading back to the hotel. It was in the middle of the night when I woke up to a knock on the window. I went to check out and move the curtains slowly. There was no one. I went back to bed and I heard the knocking again and the doorknob jiggling as if someone was trying to get in. I didn't wake up my parents. Instead, I went to check to see who it was by looking out the window again and again. There was still no one, and just as I was about to walk away, the TV turned on by itself. A show was playing, and I quickly turned it off so my parents wouldn't wake up. I see someone standing in the corner by the bathroom, staring at me with a blankly. I slowly approached the person and whispered, "Who's there? Come out." There was silence until there was a loud bang. The lamp had fallen and woke up my mom. She looked at me and said, "Why are you up? It's 3 a.m. Go back to sleep." She saw that the lamp had fallen, but luckily there was no glass. She went to pick up, and that's when she heard the bang on the window. She went to check. She saw someone pass by as she opened the door, but then the person was gone. She looked around one last time and saw the person standing there. It ran towards her as she slammed the door shut. The person banged on the door over and over again, and it woke up my whole family. The banging stopped. The next day, we quickly packed up our things and left the hotel. But as I looked back to the room 215 on the second floor, I saw the same person at the window staring back at us. We never looked back at the hotel ever again. So that's the
I know that person decided to remain anonymous, but I just wish I could ask them what hotel that was.
Yes.
So that we don't go there.
Exactly. Next story, also anonymous, and this is how it starts. I'm literally not joking. This was either supernatural or some really morbid, unwell-looking person in Laredo. I was driving at 9 p.m. after work. I go by the cemetery since it's an easier route back to the south of Laredo. Once going slightly past the little houses near the first stoplight from the cemetery, I see this elongated thing, bony creature running past. I felt like I was in cuckoo or lights out with this creature. I stared at it for 45 seconds before widening my eyes, looking back on the road to drive. I had a monster energy, so I was very awake. My hair was on its end, my skin was crawling, and I felt twitchy after what I saw. The rest of the car ride home was filled out with loud music to drown the fear and constant mumblings of prayers under my breath. This happened last week on Saturday, September 28th, 2024. If anyone has any idea or knows of anything around the neighborhood by the city cemetery, please, I need to know I'm not alone. I feel crazy just typing this out.
Thank you. For this one, also, I was thinking, so I've never actually seen the movies Cuckoo. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, Cuckoo or Lights Out, but I'm assuming they're scary movies. So put your scary movies in the chat because I will take your recommendations. And thank you so much, Ms. Partida, for reading a couple of stories for us. Do you want to talk a little bit about the Writing Center?
I can't wait. Yeah, I guess. Yes, so a little bit about the Writing Center. We are located at Erie Library, room 174, and we can help out with any type of writing and researching, papers, presentations, small assignments, and we offer different types of tutoring, including asynchronous sessions, face-to-face, virtual, and our email is writingcenter@laredo.edu.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So I know this information is also in the chat. If you need to jot that information down for the Writing Center, now is your chance. So we're going to continue with more stories. Here we have another anonymous submission. When I was a child, I used to share rooms with my younger sisters. I have always been a medium to light sleeper, so if I hear people laughing or even walking in my bedroom, I tend to wake up. One night, my younger sister decided to sleep with my parents, and I slept alone in my bedroom. This was normal as she was around 5 to 6 years old. So one day in late November, I dreamt that someone was behind me and started to touch my hair. I woke up scared. I saw across my bedroom, standing next to my bed, 3 men who didn't have feet. I thought it was my brother, maybe my dad or someone else. I was falling asleep when I realized my dad and brother were out of town for my dad's work. I wake up again and only one person is standing next to my bedroom window, smiling and giggling. I, as a child, hid under my covers and hoped he didn't notice I was awake. That morning, my mom told me she had a dream that 3 men broke into our home but didn't steal anything. They were just watching us sleep. I told her what I had seen, and then my brother called from my dad's phone and asked if we were okay because he had the same dream. I tried to draw the man who I saw laughing, and my mom told me that it looked exactly like my father's dad. He passed away when I was 2. That was spooky. Thank you, Anonymous. Okay, I'm going to keep the momentum going here. We have another submission. This one is not anonymous. This one was from Jessica Nicole Soto. Thanks, Jessica, for submitting your story. Hi, my name is Jessica, and growing up, I'd move a lot from house to house. Coming to Laredo, I used to live in a 2-story building that was also a business. Growing up, this place had a very weird vibe, even in broad daylight. In this building, the bathroom had a very big mirror. One night, when I was brushing my teeth and looking in the mirror, something caught my eye. There, in the corner of my eye, was a little girl wearing all white. She was short, pale, and had a long black hair. She looked about 6 to 8 years old. The dress she was wearing looked like a communion dress, but it looked like she had no face. I was intrigued about this girl. I would always ask her who she was and why it looked like she was stuck in the mirror. I never got a response. 2 years later, I moved out with my grandma and my mom rented a small room in that apartment. One morning when I was half asleep, my sister woke up and she saw that the door was slightly open. She saw who she thought was me peeking from the door. My sister asked my mom why I was doing that and why I was awake so early. My mom's response was that I was not at the door, but right next to her, sleeping. My heart dropped. When I heard that, I had to ask my sister what she saw that morning and what she looked like. Once she described her to me, I realized it was the same girl I would see in the mirror, slightly more human shifted. Years later, when my sister was older, the same little girl reappeared. She once again thought it was me, but it wasn't. My sister was walking out of the restroom when the little girl was peeking from the door. That night, I couldn't sleep thinking that maybe that wasn't just a little girl. Whoever that little girl is, she is sticking around. Next story is from Anonymous. One evening, while meditating as part of my practice as a green witch, she put in a disclaimer here, I do not practice black magic or anything harmful. I saw a familiar connection with my grandpa's spirit. It started nice, we chatted, shared stories, and eventually bid each other goodnight. Later, after tossing and turning in bed, thirst got the better of me. As I poured myself a glass of water, a huge ominous presence crept up behind me. I chose to ignore it, thinking whatever it was posed no threat. After kissing my dog on the head to say goodnight, I wandered back to my room. As I turned around, I caught a fleeting glimpse of a familiar white spirit I often saw gazing down at my dad while he slept. Another disclaimer. It does not do anything for those wondering, it just stares down at my dad. Yet that night, an unsettling feeling persisted, as if I were being trailed by something sinister. I climbed into bed and squeezed my eyes shut, desperate to escape this unsettling energy. But then it drew closer. The breath quickened in my throat, and the feeling of dread intensified. Fed up with this intrusion on my beauty sleep, I finally opened my eyes. What I saw sent chills down my spine. Two shadowy figures, dark and formless, with big, white, beady eyes staring right into my soul. One shadow loomed terrifyingly close, its gaze piercing through the dimness like daggers. Where was the customary hello or how are you? Instead, I felt the cold grip of fear tighten. Panicking, I screamed. The instant horror echoed around me, causing spirit number one to recoil and vanish in a heartbeat. In an instant, spirit number two followed suit, disappearing into the night as if they had never been there at all. Since that harrowing encounter, they have not returned, leaving me haunted by questions. What were they seeking in my home? Why did they come so close? At least they did not harm me, which was the only shred of comfort I found amid the lingering dread, but the uncertainty still lingers. What other secrets does the night hold while I lay asleep? You mentioned, Anonymous, that you kissed your dog goodnight, and I just want to know if you all have dogs, and if you do, please put your breeds and their name of your dog on the chat. I have 4 dogs at home, and I love them to death. Okay. Our next story is not anonymous. This was submitted by Jose Antonio Ramirez. Thank you, Jose, for submitting your story. As a kid, you are told that your imagination will run wild, and it is a time where your mind develops. Although that is the case sometimes, that monster in your closet might have been more than your imagination. I had several of those experiences, from an imaginary friend to seeing a shadow figure, but I always brushed it off. As I grew, I tried to ignore them, but one of those times I couldn't do that. Before I tell you the story, I want to put you in the setting of where it took place. It was in my living room, and this apartment had a mirror wall. It honestly creeped me out. I was around 7 to 8 years old. That day, one of my cousins and aunt were in my room, so I had to sleep in the living room. The couch was by the mirror wall. My brother and I got ready to go to sleep, and so we did. That night, I woke up around midnight. where the only source of light I could see was the moon shining through the window. I do not know why I woke up, but I did. I was looking around to see the time, but it was dark, so I could not see a thing. That is when I felt like something or someone put pressure on the couch. I think the best way to put it is when someone gets on top of the couch, but this time it was someone or something getting off the couch. At the time, I thought someone was breaking in, so at that point I was paranoid. I covered my face with a blanket and I tried to move to see what was going on. I tried everything, but I froze. I could not move nor scream. At this point, you might be thinking it's just a case of sleep paralysis, and I might agree with you, but later in the story, you might think differently. As I tried to move and scream for my parents, I couldn't. I felt myself sweating, and I heard the thing walk around. It sounded like it was wearing boots. Since my face was covered, I could not see anything. All I could see was the light through the little crack on the blanket, and I saw the silhouette of that thing. It looked human, but I couldn't tell past that. As I was walking around, it always stopped and whispered something to my brother, and then it came to me, bent down, and did not say a single word. I felt his eyes pierce through the cover, and it knew I was awake. It kept doing that a few times until it went to walk around the apartment. It came back to me one last time, looked at me for what felt like an eternity, and then left through the mirror. The next day, I told my mom about it, and she said she heard someone in the restroom rolling the toilet paper. Also, a few weeks later, I got sick and got diagnosed. It was a pretty weird coincidence. To this day, I tried to look for what I saw or if anyone had a similar experience as me, but I couldn't find anything. I leave you with this. What do you think it was? My imagination? An entity? An evil or good ghost? Future me? That was Jose. Thank you, Jose, again for submitting your story. Can you also notice that there's a reoccurring theme of mirrors? We should stay away from mirrors. Okay. Our next story is not anonymous. So this story was actually submitted by one of our instructors, Ms. Linda Ramirez. It is titled, Not Your Typical Friday Night. And then it starts. It was a typical Friday night. My cousin Jody and I had planned a movie marathon, complete with takeout from the local Chinese restaurant. We picked out a film from the video store and headed down the street to grab our dinner. The weather was starting to turn. Dark clouds swirled in the distance, but we shrugged it off and made our way back to Jody's house, the one she shared with her sister Patsy. The moment we set foot inside, the storm intensified. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and then bam, the lights went out. We fumbled in the dark, setting our bags down on the kitchen table and decided to check the breaker. Stepping outside, I noticed something strange. Every other house on the block was glowing with warm, inviting light. Jody flicked the breakers, but everything was fine. No tripped switches, no blown fuses. We returned inside, feeling slightly unsettled. When we stepped back into the kitchen, I froze. Every cabinet door and drawer was wide open, like a scene straight out of a horror movie. My heart skipped a beat, but I tried to stay rational. It's just the wind, I muttered, forcing a laugh. After all, we'd left the back door open, and the screen door wasn't exactly sturdy. The wind probably blew through, right? We shut the drawers, closed the cabinets, and brushed it off, determined to enjoy our night. I sat at the kitchen table calling for Maverick, Jody's dog, who was sitting in the hallway just outside the kitchen. Normally, Maverick was all energy, but tonight he would not budge. I called his name again, more insistently this time, but he stayed put, staring past me into the kitchen. His eyes locked on something behind me, and his low, uneasy growl sent a shiver down my spine. Jody was in the dining room, phone in hand, trying to call the power company. I glanced at her, but she wasn't looking at the phone anymore. Her eyes were wide, her face pale, her mouth hanging open in stunned silence. Jody, I whispered, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my own heart. Slowly, I turned around, and that's when I saw it. Every cabinet door, every drawer was opening by itself. They creaked open slowly, as if something unseen was deliberately moving them. My breath caught in my throat, and a cold, icy chill shot up my spine. The air felt thick, like it was charged with something beyond my understanding. "We need to get out of here," Jody stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. Without hesitation, we grabbed the food, the movie, and Maverick, who needed no encouragement to bolt, and raced out the door. The rain was coming down in sheets now, but we didn't care. We drove to my house, our hearts still racing. The next morning, we told Patsy what had happened. We expected her to laugh it off, but instead, she gave us a knowing look. "Oh, that's just Grandma," she said casually, like it was the most normal thing in the world. Jody and I stared in disbelief. "Yeah," Patsy continued, "this was her house. She died here, and she's never really left. She doesn't like other people being here. She does stuff like that all the time." We were stunned. "What do you mean she's still here?" Patsy just shrugged. "She tries to scare me sometimes too, but I just tell her to go away." The revelation hit us like a ton of bricks. We'd spent the night in a house haunted by a ghost who didn't want us there, a ghost who had made sure we knew it. And to this day, whenever I pass by that old house, I wonder if Grandma's still there, watching from the shadows, waiting for her next unwelcome visitor. I don't know. Thank you, Ms. Ramirez, for submitting your story. And Grandma was not playing around. I would have not gone back into that house. All right. Our next story is also from another instructor. This one, I'm sorry, no, it's not from an instructor, but it's not anonymous. It is Mr. Daniel Medina. "I've always been told the college is haunted." For reference, we are talking about Laredo College. "I just never thought I would go on to possibly seeing something myself. It happened more than once. I work at the Kaizen as an attendant, essentially a janitor. It was near the end of the day, about 4:30 in the afternoon. I was on the left side of the building upstairs, looking across to the other side of the game room. I could hear the squeaking of one of the janitor carts. I knew mine was with me, so I assumed it was the other attendant. As I looked towards the game room, I saw a figure walking towards the end of the hallway that would lead to either the front seating area if you went right, or the women's restroom and the Kaizen room if you went left. However, this is where it gets strange. My vision suddenly goes blurry. As I look at the figure, all I could make out was that they were wearing blue clothing and either blonde hair or a yellow hat. I rubbed my eyes and turned the corner, expecting to see the figure now either heading for the women's restroom or the seating area in the front upstairs. There was no one there. I even retraced my steps and timed the seconds I took to walk the corner to look. There was no way the figure would have seemingly vanished in the time I took to turn. And that wasn't the end of it. One day, as I was in the rear of the building upstairs, passing the TV on the wall next to the door that led to the rear staircase, I heard the faintest whisper, "Blanca." I immediately turned around to see no one. The TV was off, and the lead team hadn't moved into the rear office at the time. I didn't hear footsteps below me. There was nothing but that whisper. Both of these events happened when there was hardly anyone in the building. I have a few theories on who the ghost might be. Room 235, or the Kaizen room, has numerous objects that belonged to Congressman Kaizen. The objects could act as a magnet that draws his spirit in. The other being the spirit of an unknown soldier, since the Kaizen was built on the grounds of one of 3 barracks that once housed soldiers. So these are true stories coming from the Kaizen. Do any of y'all hang out at the Kaizen? And are you going to continue hanging out at the Kaizen? All right, next story. We are moving along here. This story is not anonymous. This is from Cruz Francisco. Thank you, Cruz, for submitting your story. It was a dark, stormy night, and I was getting ready to hit the sack. As I was getting cozy in my bed and slowly dozing off, I heard some weird noises from the hall. It sounded like long nails scratching on the floor. When I heard the sound, it sent chills down my spine, and my face became pale as if I saw a ghost. I grabbed my phone to turn on the flashlight, but as I was reaching for it, I saw a dark, eerie shadow standing in front of my door, staring me down. It was as if it was trying to say that this was its domain and that my attempts won't help me. I quickly shined the light onto my door, panicking as I imagined what I was going to see. My panic vanished when I realized it was only my jackets hanging on my door. I heard the scratching again, but this time even louder. My heart dropped to my stomach, and I also dropped my phone. I quickly stumbled to pick up my phone for its light. The light is protection. I grabbed my phone and got up, but I heard the noise again. It was even louder than before, and this time it sounded as if it was growling. I stared at my door, wondering what was on the other side. As my heart raced, I grabbed the doorknob. The cold air hits my face. I shiver as I heard something get thrown in the distance. My eyes widened and I began to shake from fear. Then I see a light coming from the kitchen, so I quietly walk deeper into the hallway. I hesitate to continue, but travel deeper into the dark abyss. Suddenly, I hear loud breathing coming from one of the rooms. I shine the light and began to panic at the thought of what could be there. I glanced over, and it's just my grandpa sleeping. I slowly walk out of his room, and I close the bedroom door behind me as I walk deeper into the dark hallway. I'm nearing the kitchen, and I see a shadow. It looked as if it was on the floor, moving its head as if it was eating something. I hear loud, wet, crunching noises. I thought maybe it was a demon eating someone's lifeless body or a werewolf eating one of my pets. I raced into the kitchen and hid under the table. I shone the light onto the creature, not knowing what could be feasting on. Then I glanced over and saw it was big and hairy. As it lifted its head up, I saw its eyes glowing as the light flashed on its face. I noticed its mouth stained in red. Its teeth were yellow and sharp. I quickly looked away and hid again. I thought to myself that the creature had spotted me when I heard it walking closer, its long nails tapping on the floor as I tried to crawl away. I bumped into it and quickly accepted my fate, but suddenly I felt something wet on my face. It was not a monster hunting me down. It was my dog who got into the fridge. Relief brushes over me as I get up to clean the mess the dog left on the floor. Beets covered in slobber. Ew. Thank you, Cruz, for submitting your story. For our next couple of stories, I'm going to bring in our next special guest. We have Ms. Alicia Reed coming in. She's coming.
Hello, everyone. So, oh my God, thank you all for submitting those spooky stories. They're really, really interesting. And we're in a dark room, as you can tell. So, I mean, it's even more scary. Okay, so I'm going to read a story that was submitted by an anonymous person. So, this is what it says. There are many stories shared of taxis, truck drivers, drivers at night that see a woman walking down the street or the highway in many different places. They said that the dead roam around this world because they have pending duties to finish. I would like to share the story that my family has shared with us for many years. My grandfather, Vidal Lozano, was a taxi driver when he was young. He was driving late at night, and on the side of the street, he saw a woman asking for a ride. She was very beautiful, wearing a long white dress and had long black hair. He stopped and asked her if she needed a ride. She silently opened the backseat door and got in. Then, quietly, she asked for Mr. Vidal to take her to the cemetery. During driving through the foggy night, Mr. Vidal arrived at the cemetery, and when he looked back in the mirror, he saw the face of the dead. He turned pale white. He was frightened and speechless. For many years, my grandfather was paralyzed due to the scare and couldn't talk. The story came out in the newspaper in Sabinas Hidalgo, Nuevo León, along with his picture. He underwent therapy and later regained his movement and speech. Rest in peace, grandfather. We will always remember your story. He always shared his story and reminded everyone to never pick up anyone late at night. Oh my God. Can you imagine how scary that was? So thank you for the person who submitted that story. The next story was submitted by Ariadna Giselle Perez, who's a student here at Laredo College. And this is what it says. The story is partly mine and partly not. When I was a little girl, about 8 years old, my mother was pregnant with my little sister, and she had a dream about the devil. In her dream, the devil told my mother, "When you and your child come home, I will be waiting for you and your baby to take you. Only Dora can help you." Dora was a pastor at church with her husband, and my mother went and talked to her. She helped her and helped bless the house. My other sister was born, but things kept happening. My mother said she saw a girl, and after a while, it became more noticeable because things moved out of place, and even death came to be seen in my house. One day, I dreamed of that girl that everyone talked about. She was in the center of my mother's room on a chair, and when I went to see who it was, she lunged at me, screaming, "Give me your mother!" Then, in the following days, we continued to hear noises or the girl's voice speaking to us. This happens whether you're at home alone or not. Up to now, it has not happened so often, but it continues to happen from time to time. We noticed not too long ago when we were at home and in the laundry room, we heard a noise. When we looked out to see what had been heard, the laundry baskets came swinging halfway down the hall. It should be noted that the baskets were against the wall above the sink, and there was no one else at home except my mom, my sister, and I, who were in the living room at this time. For us, it is normal for these types of events to happen, but God willing, it does not lead to anything bigger. That was also a very, very scary story, and I don't want to be at home alone anymore, for today, at least not today.
Not today.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that submission, Ariana.
Do you want to talk a little bit about e-learning?
Of course. So we are the e-learning department, and if you ever have any questions regarding Canvas, Respondas, Turnitin, any of those, or most of the solutions that we have in Canvas, by all means, please come in and to our department at LEAC 307. And we're here from Monday through Thursday, 8 to 8. We have after office hours, kind of, and on Fridays, 8 to 12. And we're also open on Saturdays, 8 to 2. So feel free to come by, give us a call, or send us an email. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I have 2 more stories to read. All right. This story is from Anonymous. I just caught a glimpse of that comment from Mimi to make sure all the lights are on. So I think we're all going to sleep with our lights on tonight. Okay, Anonymous. I watched a movie named The Fourth Kind. In the movie, people would dream about a white owl coming to their bedside window, wake up at 3:33 a.m., and then be abducted by aliens. That night, I fell asleep, dreamt about a white owl coming to my bedside window, and when I woke up, it was 3:33 a.m., just like in the movie. I wasn't able to sleep for the rest of the week. Needless to say, I wasn't abducted by any aliens, but that was one of the most frightening things to ever happen to me. I'm so glad you didn't get abducted, Anonymous. I recently watched Science. I think that's my favorite alien movie. All right. Now we have the last story for today. I saved this one for the end because it was my personal favorite, and this was also anonymous. It was late afternoon when I stepped into the ladies' restroom on the third floor of the LEAC building at Laredo College. The hallway outside was quiet, the kind of silence that feels unnaturally heavy, like the world itself was holding its breath. As I pushed open the door, the faint hum of the flickering fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting an eerie glow across the speckled green tiles. I moved toward the mirror, glancing at my reflection, but something was wrong. It was the kind of wrong you can't place at first, a creeping sense that you aren't alone. As I stared at myself, a shift in the corner of my eye caught my attention, movement from the first stall. Through my peripheral vision, I saw her, a girl. She was standing just behind me, her long black hair hanging in front of her face, obscuring her features. She wore an old faded sweater and a skirt. Her head hung low, as if she were staring at the floor. My heart began to pound as icy dread coiled up my spine. I didn't dare blink. I turned quickly, expecting to confront her face to face, but when I looked, the stall was empty. Completely empty. No sign of the girl. I stood there, frozen, my pulse racing, trying to rationalize what I'd seen. Had I imagined it? Was the flickering light playing tricks on my eyes? But deep down, I knew better. Since that day, I've caught glimpses of her every now and then, always in the first stall. She's there, just out of sight, lingering at the edges of my vision. Some people whisper that she's the ghost of someone buried in the old Fort McIntosh Cemetery, just across from the LEAC building. The idea of a restless spirit drifting from the graves to haunt the campus feels far-fetched, but after seeing her, I'm not so sure anymore. For me, the real question that haunts me is, how long has she been standing there, unseen, watching? Thank you, Anonymous. This story, I think, for me, was more resonated for me because the e-learning department is on the third floor. And so we walk down that hallway every single day, every time we need to use the restroom. And every time I walk down that hallway, I think of that girl. And I'm hoping that I'm not manifesting something because I have no interest in meeting her. I'm glad I haven't seen her yet or never see her at all. There's a comment that says that it happens on the second floor too. So the LEAC is known for a little girl. And if you notice all her stories, it's either a beautiful woman, a little girl, or a mirror. So let's stay away from those three tonight. Thank you to everyone who submitted their stories for our spooky confessionals. I had so much fun reading everyone's stories and reading them here live to everyone. A couple of things. We are celebrating National Distance Learning Week next week. So be on the lookout on Canvas. We're going to have announcements with several activities so that you can participate. And also, I wanted to advertise a little bit our computer lab. So we have a computer lab. It's an open lab where you can come in and use the lab. There's a printer in there, but we also have a testing lab. So I know midterms are coming up, or for any exam that you have with Canvas that needs the webcam, you can come into our department. We have a lab. We have everything set up and ready for you. So thank you again. Thank you so much. This was Spooky Confessionals with eLearning, and hope to see you all again next year. Stay spooky and have a happy and safe Halloween.